Warning, this episode contains mild to heavy explicit spoilers. Listen at your own risk.
Reviews, discussions, and theories about films in horror, sci-fi, and genre. This is The Horror Deconstruction. Like, share, and subscribe to hear more.
What's up, everybody? It's The Horror Deconstruction. This is your host, Komp. Please like, share, and subscribe if you want to hear more of the show. But let's get on to the new film today. Today's film is Soft and Quiet from 2022, and usually I do a written out sort of piece for these films as I have in the past couple of episodes. But this one's a little bit different because I sincerely think you should watch Soft and Quiet, unknown, sight unseen, without looking at trailers or anything like that, just like I did, and see and gauge what your experience was with the film. Because I certainly found it a much more enjoyable experience, and I'm sure we can do that with a lot of films. So Soft and Quiet, I'm just going to get into the sort of bare bones explanation, but I'm going to go into a little bit more of the heavy spoilers and just outright spoil it. And I'll let you know ahead of time. So for now, you're safe, but I will drop the hammer into when to stop listening and just go watch the film. So Soft and Quiet is a 2022 film. It's directed by Beth de Araujo. She's also the writer, starring Stephanie Estes, Olivia Lucardi, Dana Milliken, Melissa Paulo, Eleanor Pienta, Sissy Lai, John Beavers, and a bunch of other people like Rebecca Wiggins, Nina E. Jordan. So this film, I had no idea what it was about. I just saw a bit of buzz for it on Twitter and some Facebook pages. It had a really interesting poster of this woman's sort of discolored silhouette, which is the lead, Stephanie Estes. Stephanie Estes looks like a lot of redheaded actresses. Not to sort of lump her in, but she looks like Karen from Daredevil. She sort of looks like the actress from The Stylist. It's that kind of look, a very statuesque woman. And you know what? You just listen. Just go watch the film. Stop it right now. Right as of now, it's on Netflix. So if you have a Netflix subscription, just check it out. It's well worth watching it. It's only about an hour and a half of time in it. And we're just going to get into heavy spoilers right now in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So if you do not want to get spoiled by this film, too bad. I really actually found it a very enjoyable film. Not enjoyable in the sense of, wow, I felt good after watching it. There was a certain section of it that I was like, oh, grateful for the ending, because the film that I can immediately compare it to is Funny Games by Michael Haneke. It's not like that film specifically where the whole story is basically a torture sequence. That takes place a little bit into this film, but certainly towards the end, I was like, oh God, the director or she's gonna give us a Haneke ending where everything is just bad, bad, bad. I sort of saw the film and telegraphed how it was gonna be, just because I've seen so many films like this. But the director, Beth Araujo, did a great job of doing this film in a one-take session. It's actually, you can tell it's shot in segments, but then sort of invisible editing together, like we're sitting with these women, these these psychopaths, and we're like the fifth person of this group, or the sixth when you include her, the main lead's husband. So these are a bunch of very wrong people, and it's a very timely film because as I was watching it, the subtitle of this film, I was thinking it's like a confederate of Karens. You know what I mean? It was just like a confederacy of Karens. That's what it is, because this is basically the Karens movie. This is the real Karen movie that should have came out, because there was a Karen movie that I believe might have been a slasher movie. I'm not sure. It came out in 2021, and it was with Taryn Manning. So I guess that was more of a tongue-in-cheek. I don't know. Maybe it was like I don't know if it was comedy or dark or whatever, but that was a movie that sort of came and went, and it was trying to make money off of that whole Karen tag, where a Karen essentially is usually put on a person who makes complaints for no reason, making them the center of attention, and that what they do and say is not wrong and everybody else is wrong, and they do these complaints that seem to be coming out of nowhere, like they're the fun police sort of thing. And this film really is that. And what was really stunning about the film is that I did not know, since I didn't know what it was about, going into it, about 5 or 10 minutes, you see this woman who's a teacher at a school, played by Stephanie Estes. She's playing Emily. She seems like at first she's actually trying to take a a pregnancy test at the beginning. It was which reminded me of Evil Dead Rise. And she has this face on, like, oh, like she's really disturbed by whatever result was on the test. And obviously, we find out later that she wasn't pregnant. And obviously, she's somebody who's trying to get pregnant, but you don't know that. I don't know. It's like, oh, is she scared that she is pregnant? Is she scared that she's not pregnant? And she walks around with this big pie, and in my head, I'm trying to think, oh, I'm such a good guesser of what this film is going on. She's carrying around this pie, saying, or whatever this object is. At the beginning, I was like, oh, she's bringing food to poison somebody. She's poisoning all these people. That's going to be the shocking element, because this was pretty much touted on Twitter in a sort of horror sense, and it is a horror film in a sense, more politically for certain people. And it's funny in hindsight where she sits down and she's talking to this little boy, and she's like, "Hey, you want to see my pie?" She lifts up the cover to him. We don't see what it is, and the kid's like nervously chuckling, and I was like, "Okay, whatever." So okay, and then she tells the little boy who's Caucasian or white, and she's telling him, "Oh no, he should make a complaint to this woman who's a minority who's mopping up the school, that she shouldn't mop around him because it might be dangerous for him." And I thought, oh, maybe she's just sort of a weird lady, that this is a little teensy bit of Karen behavior in this. And I was like, okay, whatever. So whatever. She moves on. She goes to this encampment. She gets a phone call from a prison. She doesn't reply to the call. And I'm not going to recap the whole film for you, but I thought at that moment, I was like, okay, so maybe she's like, she's had an affair on her husband who's in jail, and that's why maybe she is pregnant. So I run a million different scenarios in my head when I watch a film, which is sometimes does not make it fun for me. But this one was fine because I didn't see anything. I went in sight unseen, and she meets up with these group of women. There's Leslie, who is sort of like an evil Florence Pugh, and I'd seen her. I swear I've seen her in some films, but I can't really. I don't know from what. She's Olivia Lucardi, and she's had a couple of roles that are pretty prominent. She was in It Follows, so I'm sure she was one of the friends. I think the biggest film she was in was probably Money Monster, but that wasn't a big hit. Either way, one of the funniest credits is that she was in a 2011 fan film adaptation of Sailor Moon the movie, which you've got to see. It's on YouTube. It's about 2 hours and 22 minutes, and I don't want to take away from these people that obviously loved Sailor Moon, but it was a Western sort of fan film. Like it was, I think it was a GoFundMe project, and just to see the special effects on it is worth seeing it alone. I think she did the voice for Luna the cat. So please just look at that. You just go watch that movie, or try to watch it, and preferably with drinks. There's Dana Milliken as Kim, who's I believe she owns a shop, or she's a manager at a shop, sort of like a quickie or a wine store, some sort of store, and that figures into the story. There's Marjorie, who's sort of Leslie Light. She's played by Eleanor Pienta. She's a secondary jerk, as compared to Leslie, who's a super jerk who just gotten out of prison and is trying to get her stuff straight. And anyway, so they're at this meeting, and there's like these other like-minded. They're all Caucasian women, ranging from 20s to maybe early 40s or mid 40s. Um, and the big reveal when they lift the tinfoil off the pie, and it's something that's not really shocking because the world's obviously been in this sort of weird space, I guess, forever, or at least the United States has been in this space forever. When they lift off the cover of this pie, there's a swastika carved into the middle of this pie, and the ladies are all like happy about it. And I was like, uh oh. I was like, oh, okay. So I did not know where this was going, because the only other film that I saw that had like a gathering of women that I know only seen the trailer of, I think, is the Oneida Club by Tom Six, the guy who did the Human Centipede, and that is a film about women who are pleasuring themselves to human tragedies. And I've been waiting to see that film. I haven't seen a Human Centipede or any of those movies, just because it seems like it's a film based on one gag. But the Oneida Club seems like it would be funny to talk about, but since I only do the show now by myself, it doesn't seem like me just saying jokes about something would be funny at all. But anyway, so now we know that Emily is having this meeting at a church, or the inside of sort of like the background of a church, and she's having a white supremacist meeting of women. And you always think about, the faces that you see at like white supremacy meetings, or you know how this is a really difficult thing to talk about because I'm not white and I'm certainly not a white supremacist, and those people are everywhere online, defenders of it. And if white people want to defend white people, that's fine. But there's a point when you want to destroy other races to make yourself. And I'm sure a lot of people are guilty on that. But this is pretty prominent. At least I see it all the time. But you know how they say, "Oh, it's mainstream media making sure that white supremacy is the most evil." And I was like, "Well, listen, anybody who's a supremacist is pretty messed up." And they are trying to spurn a movement, or I guess this is just a discussion between these women to discuss how horrible their lives are because opportunities that should be theirs are going to people of color. And so Emily's a teacher, and just me thinking like, oh, she like really showed this pie to that little boy. So what is she trying to influence that kid? And Leslie, who's just gotten out of prison, is she looks like Batty. She's very crazy, and that's Olivia Lucardi. She's really great at the role. Kim seems like a blue collar worker, and that's her frustration. Marjorie, for some reason, comes off as like a weirdo. She looks like a person that would live in Brooklyn for some reason, but she's also a white supremacist, I guess. And these are people. These people in this film are focused on their whiteness and their perception of mainstream media, sort of labeling them simply because they're white in their heads. That's what I'm taking from these characters, that they're evil simply, and they should just be looked down upon because they're white and they're privileged. And if everybody watches mainstream media and any sort of television, there's an agenda on every single screen that we watch, and these women took it to this extreme. So it's really uncomfortable because I bet if you watch the first 40 minutes of this movie, you're gonna be like, "What am I watching? Am I watching like a recruiting video? Like, what am I watching?" Because these are unfiltered characters talking to each other about their problems and their thoughts with the world and why they're basically putting themselves as the victims. And it was a really sort of uncomfortable, but it's very realistic. I'm sure this is going on somewhere. Like you do see mostly the men in charge on television screens and in the news, but obviously they have partners at home that either share or they don't share their views. Most likely they share their views because they're just not all running around alone. And it's a sobering view in this film. So I think watching this film and making your judgment about who these characters are in the beginning, I think that these characters themselves are nuts even before the actions that they take. And the closest thing in a cartoonish way is to call them Karens, but obviously they got very more deeper, disturbing problems in this, the zeitgeist of the world. So we obviously have that drop of information of the person from prison who had called Emily earlier in the film, and we later find out at Kim's store that she's working at. These two young women come in, played by Melissa Paolo, who plays Anne, and Sissy Lee, or Sissy Lai, who plays Lily. They're sisters, and they just want to buy a bottle of wine because they're waitresses, and they just want to unwind, I assume, for the weekend. And immediately the main squad are giving them guff because we find out that one of them was an SA victim of Emily's brother, and that the word trigger happens throughout this movie. Will trigger you. It'll trigger you if you've been SA'd, if you are like racial, because it's just like it's a racial movie. Like just the dialogue alone at the beginning is very racial, and I read some threads about people who couldn't make it past the first 15 minutes because they were probably like really upset about the movie and they had no idea what the movie was about. So them just hearing sort of this racist stuff, they probably, oh man. And I was watching and going, oh geez, like just watching this movie going, I know there's people who were like they couldn't make it because people really do get racism thrown towards them. I've gotten racism thrown towards me from whites, blacks, Latinos. It's shocking. I had racism towards me because people thought I was white, and I was like, no, I'm not white. But then I'd have racism from white guys who said very disparaging Latino things at me. So you really can't escape racism because it's just that's just how the world is. Like the other quote unquote is what everyone thinks everyone else is, unfortunately. Culture divides and culture is beautiful. So what can you do? So going back to this, they obviously have a big brouhaha with these girls. The girls just want to buy wine. They buy the most expensive wine, and it's a very tense moment. And you're just like, these chicks just wanted to buy wine, and on top of it, this girl who got Emily's brother arrested for what he did, and I assume is real. Uh, like now all the other Karens in this crew think that, oh, she must have been lying because she's a brown skin, a phrase that's used in the film. And I was like, oh boy, like it's super uncomfortable, and it has that Haneke type of style of filmmaking. It's weird because it's Haneke meets, I would almost say, the director of Irreversible. That type of film where it's just like, and he's not necessarily always one take, but I think that the use of it in this film is so interestingly done. The a Gaspar Noé type of, oh, I don't know what's going on, and it's more of experience than it is a film. I mean, not it's like a virtual film. I mean, it's like a virtual experience of probably the most insane building, like cringe-inducing terror that you have for these characters, because these women decide that they're going to pull a prank on these two young women that came in who are, I believe, of Asian descent. Some of the actors they might be Latino, Asian. They do explain what their ethnicity is in the film. So I totally skipped my mind what they said, but they are obviously not white, and so the ladies pick up on this, and they want to go to their house, so they know where they live, which is a really nice place, and that angers these women even more because a lot of them feel that their opportunities are being taken away from people of color. So when they see this house, it makes them even angrier. And what happens, obviously, like you think, it goes bad, and the girls come back a little bit early, and they hold them hostage. And I knew ahead of time, like it was just going to go poorly because there's no other way. There's no way that this is not going to happen. It's not. That's how you build a foundation for a film that's sort of a thriller. But one sister, they start force feeding her food for some reason. I guess in a funny way to one of them. And obviously, I was like, "Oh no, I don't. I know somebody because they were just going to scare them, quote unquote. I don't know how you do not get out of the situation by scaring somebody. You're screwed anyway. If you pull this type of stuff where you kidnap people in their own home and tie them up, and the relationship between Emily and her husband Craig, I don't know if I assume maybe he is sort of a white supremacist guy either. I don't know. The fact that she has these ideas, and before when they were in that church, they got kicked out by the preacher because he was like, he don't want that in his building either. But Craig seems level headed, but he's level headed in a way where he knows you can get in trouble. You can get fired. You know what I mean? He knows that he has a responsibility to pay bills and have a lifestyle, and he's not willing to do these shenanigans as far as this film dictates to lose his livelihood just because he's upset at somebody else. And so their relationship is very like disturbing for the fact that she wants an alpha male, and he's reasonable. I guess only in this. He's reasonable to a point where he's telling them not to do it. After that, when he starts helping kidnap the women, and he ends up running off. I don't know what to do. Maybe to go drink or something. He just disappears from the film midway, and one of the sisters obviously dies because of the peanuts she's ingested. I knew that was gonna happen. I was like, she's gonna die. She's gonna be allergic from it. But I don't know if they brought the. That was one thing. I don't know if the Marjorie character. I wonder if she's named after somebody. Certainly, that's in the U.S. House of Congress. But I don't know if she brought those peanuts with her or that was in the house, because I don't understand if the sisters would have that in the house knowing that one of them had a peanut allergy. I doubt it, but maybe that was a little screw up in the writing. I'm not sure. I knew she was going to die, and then because she was an SA victim, they wanted to kill the girls and then stage it to be the one who was SA'd already was assaulted again. So then she assaults her with a carrot, and then she thinks she suffocates her, and then it leads to these women trying to clean it up. And it's a very fast moving film. Like I was never bored at once. I was just like, it's just very white knuckle experience type of thriller horror. And I tell you, I was on the edge of my seat watching this, and the fact that it was only an hour and 29 minutes, and you're never bored, even though it's a one take type of film. And the only other one take film that I saw recently was like, or a while ago, a couple years ago, was called Bushwick, and it starred Dave Bautista, and it's about like Confederate states trying to take over New York City because they didn't expect anybody to have guns. And it's actually a pretty fun movie. It's a very It's a very depressing movie towards the end, but it's actually really watchable. And it's Dave Bautista, starting to try to act. So go watch Bushwick. That was a fun movie. It has a good soundtrack too. Also, I saw 1917, which is a war film, and it's a one take type of film too, and it's incredible. It's an incredible film to see on the big screen. I am so glad that I saw that movie on the big screen. So just go watch that movie. Preferably, they'll keep bringing that movie back on the big screen because that is just an incredible film. 1917. But with the one take, uh, I always have a problem because you're going to be following these people walking for a while. But the soundtrack is really well done. Has this sort of moody ambient score to it. The guy who did the director of photography apparently worked out for a while before because he knew he had to do a lot of work with this movie. And this movie was also sort of based on an incident in New York City where this woman who called, she was a Karen, and she called out this guy who was African American, and she was saying that he was like trying to rob her or something, but he was bird watching, and so then it turned out on her. She got in trouble, and now that guy has a job on the National Geographic channel, and he never pressed charges on her, but she was using her privilege as a woman and white, apparently, according to people who write these articles. There were a lot of incidents of women calling the cops, saying that something happened and it didn't. And it was really disturbing. And you want to see that justice meted out on film. And I was sincerely watching this movie, going, oh, they're going to get away with this. Like, they're going to find some way to get away with this. And the women in this film are believing that they're going to get away with this. And honestly, you don't have a doubt that they might get away with this because who knows what goes on in this world. Like, we see a lot of people that are accused of stuff that they didn't do and they get away with it. And people who do bad things, they'll still get away with things. So watching these four like psychopaths, two of them who have children, one of them is pregnant, one who's trying to have children, the other one who's trying to get her life straight after prison, but is obviously the most unstable one and is sort of directing the shots. And Leslie is just a great sort of villainous role because you'd think Emily because she's the brains and Leslie's the brawn, and you see at times they're clashing between each other. And I thought that was a fascinating sort of character development in this film. And the film is short for what it is because I think if this film had a lot was done in a traditional sort of framed and cuts and edits and everything, they probably would have shoved in a lot more material. But I think we've learned what we needed to learn about these characters from the beginning. I don't believe that they're cartoonish. Like, I don't feel anybody in this film is unrealistic. I believe people get into these situations, and the fact that they have this history with this young woman, Anne, who was assaulted by Emily's brother, and that already gives, and it's done so well that it's not over the top explanations or anything like that. Like, we just are given the information that we need to know, and the film follows a sort of realistic tumbling snowball of chaos. And towards the end, I really thought, because like going back to the funny games Haneke type of film, when they were on that boat, and we did see obviously the girl's body moving inside the makeshift bag, or I guess it was a camping sleeping bag that they put both girls' bodies into, that they threw it over the water, and I was like, oh, shit, it's gonna be like Funny Games. Sorry if I spoiled the Funny Games. So there's two versions of that movie. Go watch that movie. But I thought like, oh, these bad guys are gonna get away with it, and we won't know anymore. Now it's gonna be like a cinematic like tease that the movie's just gonna end. And I as soon as I saw Anne burst out of that water breathing, like I was watching this movie in the middle of the night and I like screamed yes. I was like, oh my god, there's some hope in this movie because usually a film like this, like horror movies, the bad guys will always get away with it at the end. And I do believe in justice in some movies, at least, because we don't get it in real life. I enjoy, but I'll read books. Horror. I read extreme splatter books, and usually nobody gets away from those alive. And films, they usually relish in scaring people, like The Strangers or Natural Born Killers, and movies like that, where the bad guys get away with it. And I get it. That's just how it is. The horror is that these people are outside ready to do anything. So to actually see or get the implication that Anne will meet justice over these four women who feel that their pegs are taken down by society at large. It's like that she's gonna totally fry them. They're gonna be fried. But who knows what'll happen with these women? Like, if you ever look at laws where people do terrible, terrible, heinous things and they only get like 5 years for the most heinous acts, and If these women were politicians, they probably would have got a ticker tape parade for what they did. But I found that extremely satisfying where the girl bursts out of the water at the end. I was so grateful for that one shot. And I don't know whether that's the director saying that, there is some sort of hope if you go through this, to not be afraid to say something, because the movie just ends after she bursts out of the water. And I think that was, and the fact that the camera's lingering on the water for a very long time before she bursts out, that I was like, oh my god, it was just sort of such a relief. And I wish I would love to see all four of the women get burned at the stake by the end of the at a sequel. I could watch a whole hour of them just getting arrested and getting hit over the head with batons, but that's not the case, and that's not the type of film this is. It's a film about modern terrorism and social classes, and how we deal with one each other, how the societal blinders that we put on ourselves are filters, and how we treat others, and how we view ourselves, and the importance of ourselves, and the self victimization and things like that. I think it's a fascinating take, and it's not a film that's afraid to give voice to these type of people at the beginning of the film. To see, obviously, if you're with these characters, then there's no hope in certain aspects for you. If you're like, yeah, yeah, you know what, they're not wrong. And I'm sure there's there's meetings, supremacy meetings, where they're playing this movie and they cut off the last part where the girl jumps out of the water alive. They're probably, wow, that was a fun movie. Well, that was great. And they'll just cut out the last like 5 minutes where you see Anna's alive. And I think it's an important movie to watch. I hope that it gets a following, and it is very. I'm sure it is a very hard movie for people to watch just from the content alone and hearing sort of the disgusting things that these characters are saying at the beginning of the film, and that we're following them, and we're like, oh, we're making them the protagonists. Like, no, they're not the protagonists. Obviously, they are the sort of antagonists because we see what they do. Just from a slight insult, these women want to control the lives of these two girls who really did nothing other than exist. So that this type of film really is a modern horror film. It is probably labeled more of a thriller, but certainly I think a lot of people believe that it is horror because this stuff really happens. These people do exist. These are the people that are not seen in the forefront as the antagonists, when a lot of them are like that. And I'm not talking about white women in general. I'm not talking about women in general. I'm talking about people that have a hatred agenda. Anybody who has hatred in their hearts for people that they don't know, like, the hell with that. And so that's the type of people that you're scared of, because these people are organizing. You know what I mean? It's that type of film where you see the organization of something screwy going on, and it's spooky. So I think that's where the great use of storytelling comes in. And I think that the director did a great job. Like, apparently she was roomies with the lead actress Stephanie Estes, and the director was like, "Hey, I got this idea for you," and they got into it, and it's pretty fearless. The characters that they're playing. So I don't know the backgrounds of these actresses, but everybody did a great job in this film. There's some sort of iffy sort of acting elements because they're taking long takes, and I would be like, oh, I would rather do this. You should do this instead. But I think all in all, you can sort of buy what's going on in the film. It's not a weak point if there's some sort of weird line readings in this film, because you can't predict how people talk in real life. But I think it's a fascinating film, and I believe you will enjoy it if you are willing to give yourself over to seeing a very hard piece of cinema. And I think the director did a great job, and so I would give this movie an 8 out of 10. Just trying to buy the most expensive bottle of wine and leading to one of the worst nights you can ever experience. And with that, this has been the Horror Deconstruction.